In our last lesson, we learned how to create a basic form. We set up two text input elements and a submit button. And we also set up the form tag with the attributes needed to get the data sent out properly. In this lesson, I'd like to expand on some of the different types of elements that we can use in our forms, so we can gather exactly the information we need from our users. Now, the first two new types I want to look at are here, checkbox and radio button. They're both a way for you to ask a multiple choice question and have your user select the appropriate response. And both of them use the input tag. Let's set up the checkbox first. I'll go here before the first response and I'll add in an input tag. This time we'll set the type to checkbox. Like all other form input elements, we need to add a name attribute so we can tell this data apart from the others. And for this name, I'll just call it check. For this type of input, we need to add one more attribute, and we used it actually down in our submit button. It's the value attribute. Now for this type of input, my user won't be typing anything in. They'll just be checking a box. So the value attribute will be needed to tell me which box they checked. I'll call this one ch1, and then I can finish out my input tag. Since we want two boxes to check, I'll need an input for the second one. So let's just copy the first one, and I'll paste it in front of the next option. For this one, the value is going to be ch2. But we'll actually leave the name attribute the same, since both of these data options will be applied to the single question. Now our radio buttons get set up in a similar way. So since I still have it in the clipboard, I'll paste an input field in front of our two radio options down here. But we'll make a few changes. First off, the type this time is going to be radio. And we want to give this a new name since it's a different question we're asking the user. So I'll change it to radio. In this case, we also want them to have the same name, because these two values are grouped for the same question. And now all we need to do is give them an appropriate value for the answers. So I'll reset the value on this one to R1, and we'll set the second one to R2. Now the real difference between these two elements here is how we're going to allow the user to check the boxes. For a checkbox, my user will be allowed to check any of these values that they want. But for radio buttons, it will only allow my user for each question to give me one or the other response. So let's save our changes, and we'll go see how this works. First, when I refresh the page, you can see that the appropriate boxes are set in front of our options. We've got squares for checkboxes and round buttons for radios. On the checkbox, I can click the first and the second, or have any combination of them selected. But down here for the radio button, I'll select the first one, and you'll notice when I select the second one, the first one gets deselected. So as a user, I'm only able to choose one of these two possible answers. The next input we want to try out down here says message. And what I'd like to do is set up a text field, but I'd like to give more space than just one line. We typically use this type of field for comments, or anytime the user might need to send me a paragraph or two. The tag we'll use here for the message box is different. We'll be using the text area tag. And it works a little bit differently too. This tag actually has the capability of having contents, whereas our input tags are just one-liners. I can place something inside the tag, and that will act as a starter message for the box. And then I simply put a closing tag at the end. Now let's save that change, and we'll go back out to the browser and refresh. And you can see that this input looks like a little bit bigger box. It's actually resizable by the user, and if you start typing into it, you'll notice that you can type several lines. Of course, if you want the box just to be empty, you can leave the tag empty here as well. And that way it'll just be an empty text area that your user can start typing into. Now the last form element I wanted to show you is a drop-down menu. It's also a multiple choice selector, but it's really useful when you have a lot of options. You can imagine a page filled with radio buttons or checkboxes would be kind of confusing for a user. To set this up, we need to start off with the Select tag, and that will create our drop-down menu for us. I'll go down at the bottom of our options and close that tag. And in the case of both of these tags that we've used, we should have a name field in here as well to set up a name for the data. So I'll go up to our message one and I'll add in a name of message. And here in the Select tag, I'll add a name attribute of dropdown. For the Select tag, we need to add one other tag in combination with it to set up our options, and that is the Option tag. Very much like the radio and checkbox, we also need to include a value so we know which option they selected. So I'll go to this first one and add in a value attribute, and I'll just set it equal to 01. We'll need option tags for each one of the items we want our user to be able to select. And each one of those tags will need a close option tag as well. And of course, the last thing we need to do to set up our drop-down menu is to give each one of these elements a different value, so we know which one they've selected. Now that we have it set up, let's just save our changes, and let's go onto the browser and see how it works. When I refresh the page, you can see our pull-down menu is now included next to the drop-down label, and when I click on the arrow, I can make my selection from any one of the options available. Well, now you can see we have a few different elements that we can choose from. We can have our user give us a single line of text or multiple lines of text. And we've got 3 different ways for our users to give us an answer to a multiple choice question. In the next lesson, I'd like to expand on some of the new options we have available in HTML5 that give us even better ways to gather information from our users.